Hi, everyone. My name is Asselin. I'm a senior fellow at the University of Toronto Munk School of Global and Public Affairs. I'm delighted to be here today to speak about a topic that is very close to my heart, but I think that is fundamental in the way we think and conceptualize economic growth going forward, including for fintech, which is the rise of the intangibles economy. Let me say a few words first on how that came to be, how the intangibles economy became to be so important, and also what are the main policy implications going forward. As most of you know, the fourth industrial revolution that happened, started to happen about a decade ago, has been consequential in at least two ways. The first is the explosion of new technologies that has allowed us to really change the way we do business. And the second, of course, is the power of big data. So essentially our ability to compute and aggregate big data has been a huge game changer, and the way that business have been able to create value, economic value as they move forward in their services, products, etc. You really see the rise of the intangibles economy in two ways when you look at metrics and measurement. The first is in market value. You look at the S&P 500, and the ratio of intangible assets went from about 15% 20 years ago to about 90% now. You look at the current market rally, and given that we're going through a pandemic, and it's quite telling that essentially you have 25% of the S&P who is driven by big tech companies such as commonly referred as FANG, who are really driving the market up. And that tells you how important the intangibles are. The second kind of way of seeing the rise of the intangibles is the investments that you're seeing at the firm's level and across the sectors, from banking to agriculture or transportation. What you see is absolutely important for all the firms investing in intangibles assets such as software, AI, data, computing ability, etc. So that makes it quite evident to see how intangibles economy have become a huge part of what we're seeing now. Why is it so powerful? It is powerful because the ability you have in the intangibles economy is to scale. And I guess there are two quick examples I could give. One is if you look at transportation, or the way that people would build a taxi company or a fleet. A traditional way of doing it would be to hire a driver and buy cars and build a fleet. But a more intangibles way to do it would be what Uber and Lyft are doing, which is to use AI and software and analytics in your business model to basically scale without having to buy all these things. In fact, as most of you know, Uber owns no taxis. So that is quite telling. The Blockbuster Netflix comparison is also telling. We used to drive and go rent a DVD at the store. Now all we have to do is open our TV, and because of Netflix software and business model, we're able to watch it home. And so that tells you the transformation that has happened over the last years. What are those policy implications I was referring to at the beginning on the intangible assets economy that we live in? I'm sorry. The first will be, in my view, a significant shift in how we think about innovation policy in this country, but most of the Western country. Innovation and economic policy has been driven by supply side economics, which is to say that tax incentives have been used such as in Canada, SHRED or IRAP, to incentivize innovation. In our view, this has had mixed success. And what we think now is required is to focus much more on demand side driven policies, such as using procurement to leverage our innovation system and allow our company to grow from a demand side, demand driven policy, which is to say that, you know, the state or the governments and the private sector co-create markets together when there's demand, but demand has to be directed. In other words, if the government says climate change is a priority, and I challenge company to bring new technologies to the fore to make sure that we're going to reduce our emissions, then you suddenly have a demand to create these products, and you have companies able to take more risk as a result. The same would be obviously true with fintech and financial innovation. The second big reform that is needed in our view is a truly national intellectual property, which is so important to the intangibles economy. The foundation of where there's value in the economy and the intangibles economy is really in the IP you have. And so it is so important for governments to focus on that. And we think that, unfortunately, there's not enough incentives to create and retain IP in Canada. And lastly, and I'll close on this, we can focus, as we have done, mostly on the start of the continuum when we think about innovation, which is to say, to spend a lot of money on R&D, to fund our universities well, but this is not an innovation policy. What is required now is to scale and commercialize our human intellectual capital, which is intellectual property. And so if we fund all these things at the beginning, but then when it comes to scale and commercialize our own inventions, patents, and we just give it away to foreign firms, then we'll never build a real innovation ecosystem in Canada. And I'm afraid a sector such as fintech will never be able really to be successful. So we need the right policy framework to allow firms to retain and create IP in Canada, but also to scale and commercialize here in Canada, including late-stage capital and long-term capital for companies to be able to really be successful and remain Canadian and grow as global firms. I'll close on that. It was a true pleasure to be with you today, and I wish you a very successful conference. On that, I'll pass it on to Cato, who will moderate a great panel on some of these topics and much more. Thank you for having me.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. So today we've got three fantastic panelists for our session, and I'll start off just by introducing them. Firstly, we have Frances MacRae. Frances is the Assistant Deputy Minister of Small Business and Marketplace Services at Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. The sector collaborates with and has oversight on responsibilities for the Business Development Bank of Canada and also administers 3 ISED marketplace frameworks. Secondly, we have Elisabeth Laett. Elisabeth is the managing partner of Holt Accelerator. She's also a founding partner of Zafan Group, which is an angel investment company that's focused on providing startup and early stage companies with business knowledge and financial capital to maximize their potential for success. Elisabeth is an active board member of Yes Montreal, FinFusion Montreal, and was recently named as one of the top 50 women in fintech in Canada. And lastly, we have Michael King. Michael holds the Lansdowne Chair in Finance at the University of Victoria's Gustafson School of Business. He's the co-author of the Technological Revolution in Financial Services, How Banks, Fintechs, and Customers Win Together, forthcoming this August with the University of Toronto Press, which I have no doubt his comments on that will be incredibly useful and insightful for this panel. So firstly, just want to thank the three of you for joining us today, and great to have you here with us.
Thank you, Cato.
So we'll start off with, I think, one of the hard-hitting questions that's been, in the media a lot lately, and I think a lot of people have been thinking about this. So, as we all know, we've been talking about fintech for many years. I think I've been involved with NCFA conferences for probably 6 years now running, which is, it's been a very long time. And fintech has been, over the last decade, a very popular and a very important trend globally. We've seen how it's brought competitiveness to the banking sector. We've seen how it's improved financial products for customers. Yet, as much of it's been evolving over the globe, here in Canada, we consistently get ranked as an underperformer when it comes to fintech and the evolution of fintech and really driving forward as leaders in innovation. So I'd like to kind of explore that a little bit further with the panel here and ask all of you the question, what are the main roadblocks that are driving this behavior, and why is the fintech industry in Canada not more competitive? Like, what are the roadblocks that we need to overcome in order to make sure that we are more competitive on the global stage? Maybe Michael, we can start with you on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Cato. So I've been also following fintech in Canada since around 2016 when I created the digital banking lab at Ivey Business School. And when I started, one of the first things I did is I looked at what was happening globally. And we would hear that Australia, the UK, Singapore, and Hong Kong were leaders in fintech. And one thing they had in common was they had a coordinated national strategy to promote their fintech sectors, both domestically but as an export industry. So in March of 2016, for example, Australia's finance minister, now their prime minister, Scott Morrison, published a national strategy called Backing Australian Fintech. And in that document, he said, I want to help create an environment for Australia's fintech sector where it can be internationally cooperative and play a central role in helping the economy. The UK published its own research, its own fintech strategy a month later. They commissioned a study from KPMG, and this led to the setting up of a fintech panel to oversee the UK strategy, which included pushing on open banking and promising to help startups with basic professional services, including legal, accounting, and regulatory compliance. So what I identified then, and what remains true now, is that Canada does not have a national fintech strategy. Instead, we view fintech as kind of a zero-sum game between our startups and our existing financial institutions, rather than as a source of global competitiveness and for the intangible economy. So we're not pushing forward fast enough on open banking, and this is certainly hurting our domestic entrepreneurs. And at the same time, it's creating openings for technology companies such as Amazon or Shopify to move into financial services, as well as foreign financial institutions. And these are the real threats to Canada's incumbent financial institutions, not our fintechs. So I would say, Cato, that it's really benign neglect of our fintech sector. And my last point is that I think that we need to look at fintechs in a different light. When you look at a fintech, if you're, say, a financial institution, you may see a bee that's trying to sting you. I see a pollinator that is trying to bring diversity to our financial ecosystem. I see fintechs as being the best potential partners for Canadian financial institutions because fintechs are better set up to help underserved or overlooked segments, such as small businesses or Canadians with poor credit histories or even new Canadians with no credit history. They basically bring the innovation that the big financial institutions need, and they create an export sector that we should be promoting globally.
Great, thanks for that context, Michael. I totally agree with all of what you said. I guess maybe Elisabeth, over to you. Is there anything that you would add to that? Anything you disagree with, or anything that you think from a roadblock perspective, is really hindering Canada's ability to move forward here?
I think I absolutely agree with the roadblocks, and I think in our conversation or prep for this, I mentioned, our Senate has put together in terms of a report on the Standing Committee on Banking and Trade and Commerce. it's over a year old, and basically it was really giving some excellent recommendations to the government regarding 7 steps that needed to be taken. Primarily, Canadian consumers need access to open banking regulation as soon as possible, primarily for 3 reasons. I think the first is keeping their personal financial information safe. Today, we have a very hybrid element. There's a number of third-party fintechs who are scraping off banks' websites. The regulation regarding security of that is a little unclear. And so, there's this kind of divergence happening. So I think that we need a national policy on that. Really, I think, there's been no progress made in the last year, and, very different than the US, which was a big ramp up for fintech, which, today regarding the COVID-19 programs for Canadian small businesses were only allowed to be delivered exclusively through the Canadian banks. And I think that was, a big missed opportunity in order to start to test the waters of what this could look like. Good for certain portfolio companies that we had that were able to jump in on the US side to be able to participate in the loan distribution program. I think very different, where I look at economies and different fintech regulations that are working really well. I'll make a comparison on the UK. It is the ability to receive electronic money institution license, which is the EMI. It allows paytech and fintech companies to offer services that are in common with financial operations. No such license exists in Canada, and it creates this big inability to operate. If I take Coho, for example, has to rely on partnership with incumbent institutions in order to move their customers' money. I think, we really need to see changes there. The point that I was also mentioning, from a government side, we still have a massive debt problem here in Canada from a personal finance side. We have undereducated consumers and consumers of debt, and certainly how we're going to educate the common masses, and whether that be from the business side as well as the retail side, that needs to change. And that's really where I see that fintech can have a significant amount of impact in terms of making us an overall more competitive economy, just from better management of our overall financial aspect of our lives.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that, and I think with respect to financial literacy and education, I think I've also seen us rank quite lowly on an international scale, and I think a lot of these points are subtly interconnected. Definitely, speaking from working with small businesses over the last 5-6 years with our business, can definitely kind of talk to the lack of financial literacy and education, and how important it is that we make development there. I guess, Frances, maybe kind of asking you, still the same question or same topic, from a government perspective, are there things that you see as roadblocks, or, do you think that there are potentially opportunities for, more people to work with the government to advance fintech and the fintech industry?
Yeah, thanks, Cato. So I'll just add a couple of things. I know we've got a lot of questions. First of all, I'm really in listening mode today, and I've had a lot of discussions with my colleagues in the Department of Finance on the issue of fintechs. I mean, obviously, we see Canada, my department, Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, we see Canada as a place with a ton of innovation potential in the fintech world, as well as in other companies, other types of companies. One of the barriers we see to continued kind of development of fintech, but also generally speaking to things like trade, e-commerce, and other kind of opportunities to scale companies, is actually low rates of digital adoption overall. I think in 2017, Statistics Canada estimated that only about 47% of Canadian companies even have a website. And so we really need to work on this. This is something, digital adoption is something we've been working on very hard with colleagues like the Business Development Bank of Canada and others, our regional development agency colleagues. We really do have to be able to exploit technology in a way that we're not quite doing yet. I guess maybe the last point I would just make about the issue of regulatory or the use of fintechs in the current context of COVID. I know, and I mean, again, my colleagues at the Department of Finance would say to me that, in the crisis, what they were trying to do was use the existing mechanisms that are there as quickly as possible to get money out. And so they did decide to go with the established financial institution network as it is. We know that many of the financial institutions are working with the fintech industry, which is great because there's real potential there for the banking industry to become much more innovative. And so one of the things that our colleagues at the Department of Finance would say is that, you know, the regulatory context in Canada is a little different from where it is in other places, where fintechs have been much more used to deliver the current aid. So I know this isn't about just, you know, the COVID environment, but I did want to just add that point from the perspective of my colleagues at finance.
For sure. I think the fear, you know, from many is that, you know, we are, you know, behind. I think as both Michael and Elisabeth had mentioned, and I think this type of environment runs the risk of putting us farther behind. You know, is a challenge for, you know, just from a macro perspective for us to be aware of. I think that is a good segue into our second question here. So maybe I'll pivot into that, which is, you know, you brought up the point, and a couple of you have brought up the point that a number of different fintech providers in Canada have been more focused, you know, disproportionately to other places, and, you know, walking or cutting costs for banks, rather than, you know, creating new innovative solutions that benefit customers. So, you know, we still see a lot of customers that are paying higher fees relative to international counterparts, services that we don't yet have in Canada that they have in other places like the US and the UK. You know, do we think that, you know, from a Canada perspective, so, you know, not maybe focusing on the customer so much, but from a macro perspective, and we look at, you know, the future of our country, do we think that, you know, the partnership model, so enabling banks and incumbents, is a good thing or a bad thing for Canada, or where does it fit on that scale? I guess, Elisabeth, maybe I'll start by asking you this one.
I think first, sorry, one of the first things that we use the word fintech very liberally, and fintech applies to many elements. There is what I consider to be the technology company that is providing direct-to-consumer services. There is technology that is enabling incumbent financial institutions in order to achieve operational efficiency. Then there is the financial technology solutions that are providing white label or in partnership with banks to add additional services. And I think you have to look at really all three. You know, there's no doubt that based on incumbent legacy systems that the large incumbents are dealing with and are certainly stripping away and modernizing on a regular basis. But it's challenging sometimes to offer new services in that environment. I mean, innovation within organizations is challenging just due to the processes themselves, and most fintechs that are selling technology to banks certainly understand the challenges there and the time that it takes to do that. You know, the ability in cost cutting for incumbents is often infrastructure innovation. And that infrastructure innovation then will lead to the ability to offer a new set of products. So yeah, I'm fully supportive of looking at it in terms of cost cutting, because the cost cutting then allows budgets to be deferred towards the offering of new services. And that modernization of the back end of our financial system is really, I think, what is the biggest hurdle, and why, you know, there is this ongoing discussion between the incumbents, government, and our ability to look at regulation regarding new fintechs. I do think that, you know, that is a path that is evolving quickly, and I think fintechs are absolutely essential to banks in terms of bringing in new innovation into their organizations. And, you know, it is a key focus of Holt in order to work in partnership with our financial institutions to introduce technology there.
Michael, do you agree with that? Do you think that we more focus on a different lens?
Yeah, Cato, I mean, I think there's two types of partnerships that are really important for our fintech sector, and one would be partnerships with banks, insurance companies, and asset managers, and the other is with government at both federal, provincial, and municipal levels. So, you know, as you've experienced yourself, many fintechs may start off being business-to-consumer businesses, and that has proven to be very difficult for them to scale due to the high costs of acquiring customers, as well as the difficulty of navigating complex regulations. And so a number of fintechs have been forced by this reality to become business-to-business providers and working with financial institutions. And I think that those kind of partnerships are extremely valuable, because they combine the innovation and the creativity and the speed of the startups with the large, massive customer bases, as well as the expertise on risk management and compliance and regulation that larger financial players have. And I really think that there is a great opportunity for many fintechs, not all, but many, to work together with our FIs to be successful. But for those that are trying to scale in a direct-to-consumer business, I think partnerships with governments are really important, because in many countries, Australia and the UK I mentioned earlier, the government has committed to being the big first customer for a fintech, and they've committed to providing services to their citizens using a portion of that delivery electronically through their fintechs. And that large customer, it provides reputation, it provides the ability to scale, and it attracts funding. And I think that partnerships with all levels of government can be extremely valuable for helping our smaller fintechs to become large successful players.
Frances, maybe I'll just ask you on this question. Like, do you have any thoughts on how we can accelerate or get more partnership going between fintech and government, or getting the we've seen in some other sectors that start to happen, in healthcare especially recently. Like, I guess in the fintech space, do you have any thoughts or ideas on how we can accelerate that?
Sure. Thanks, Cato. I guess I would have two ideas. One is certainly I don't disagree. I think Michael's quite right that, a big part of what government needs to do is be the first customer, whether it's fintech or other. Really important that that we know what's out there on the market, and that we're able to, provide that kind of, experience that many companies are looking for. Whether it be in the technology field or elsewhere. I mentioned earlier about the collaboration with the banks, that I think it is really key, that both Elisabeth and Michael talked about. There is that kind of knowledge and trust that gets developed between, the financial institutions that are there, as well as the fintechs and the capabilities that they have, which I think can only be good as we go forward. I would also just say that in terms of first customer, I mean, we have some new programs at the Government of Canada now. One of them is called the Innovative Solutions Canada. And what we're trying to do is make sure that where government has a challenge or a problem, we actually put it out there to have companies apply to provide a solution. And increasingly that particular program is available not only to federal government, but it's also available to provincial and territorial government. So that's really important. We do want to have people be able to, put out those challenges and be able to hear from the market. And I guess the last thing I would say, I mean, this happens to me probably twice a week, and to all my colleagues across government, quite often we get people calling in to us and saying, we want to talk to you about our product. We want to talk to you about the innovation we're doing. We want to know if there's, we want you to know about us, but we also want to know if there's a use in government, a partnership. And I frequently will put those folks together. I just did this morning with a colleague in another department that I think actually could potentially use some of the capability that they have as an innovative small firm. So, staying in touch with the market, what's out there and what's developing is a big part of what we are supposed to be doing. And that's a big element, I think, that people need to remember, is that, call somebody up, ask for a meeting. That's what our job is.
Cato, if I can just add to what Frances and Elisabeth said, I think there's a fantastic case study that we can talk about in SecureKey. Many people may not think of SecureKey as a fintech, but they obviously provide the data security and authentication that makes payments possible. And one of the ways they were able to grow and become so successful is because they partnered with the banks on one hand and with Canada Revenue Agency on the other. And now they provide the infrastructure for us to make our annual tax payments. And I think, that kind of partnership has allowed SecureKey to raise a lot of capital and to go globally and to be successful outside Canada. And I think there's many other entrepreneurial fintechs that could be in that position.
I think I'm going to add to that statement also, because what I think is an excellent example, having just gone through the tax process, is the aspect, and this was a great partnership, I think, between government and Intuit. So that ability to download all of your tax information right into your tax program, I think it was a phenomenal first step in terms of looking, and I'm really going to put Intuit as a fintech from that perspective. Where I see this going in future is, I'd love to be able to say, okay, I have $2,000 owing to the Canadian government. Is that right at that, point in time, I can actually look at samples of loans that I can undertake that are integrated into there in order to pay that tax bill immediately versus paying the penalty fees associated with late payments on the government. But I do see movement, and I do applaud. Under the manufacturing space, the government, I think it was called the UCCI program, where the government, if you were under $200,000 in revenue, the government provided $200,000 in order to partner with an institution in Canada. I would love to see some of those programs applied to advancing fintech. So all you had to do was find some area of government where your technology could be relevant. So I think, I see progress. So Frances, I do think that a lot of the elements that you're bringing up are highly relevant.
I think maybe to kind of get into what I view at least is a path that we have working a little bit less efficiency. I'd say is more of the I think a lot of what we're those examples are enablers, and I totally agree. Enablers I think have been successful. Internationally, we've seen, this is an overused term, so I don't like to use it, but disruptors have been quite successful in other markets like the US and the UK. We haven't seen that here, and so we don't see a lot of what's called challenger banks, for example. In the UK, I can name probably 50 challenger banks that have gained various levels of traction. I think maybe we've got a couple here in Canada, so you're operating at a very different scale. I don't necessarily view challenger banks as the thing that should scare our banks, and I don't think banks are necessarily scared of them. However, I do view big technology companies, Amazon, Facebook, Google, as potentially forces that could actually be disruptive in the long run. So by holding back, potentially some of these disruptors, so to speak, from coming to the market and making our banks competitive, do we more run the risk of our financial sector being threatened by those big technology companies? Like, is that something that we foresee as a potential future issue? Michael, you're nodding, so maybe you want to respond to that.
So the book that I have forthcoming with U of T Press, we basically worked for the past couple of years with banks, with fintechs, with venture capitalists, and it covers Canada, the US, Europe, and Asia. The message that comes through clearly from all those players is that what are called tech fins, or technology companies going into financial services, or big tech, if you prefer that term, for the United States, for North America, are the single biggest challenge for incumbent financial institutions. In Canada, I have a chapter devoted to it, but I profile basically Ant Financial, which was part of the Alibaba group, and how they grew and what allowed them to grow in China. But we also focus on Amazon and how Amazon has moved very systematically into financial services in the United States, outside the United States, starting with payments, moving into loans, credit, and checking accounts. And this is a playbook that is being used by Apple, by Facebook, by Google, but also in Canada by Shopify or by PayPal or by other players. Their goal is to provide e-commerce or provide other non-financial services, and financial services are bundled with them. And I think that is the future, where the customer is put first and their needs are put first, and it's not really about providing a financial product.
Should we be scared of that, given how large our financial institutions are and how crucial they are to the current makeup of our economy?
Well, Dave McKay has been very clear, CEO of RBC, that he views those companies as the main threats to to RBC, and the other banks view it the same. And you hear the same from insurance and asset managers, that they know that those are the companies that have the scale, the capital, the technology to really take away their business. And so they are working to partner with them as much as possible, and also to partner with Canadian technology companies.
I think to that point, the motto of disrupt or be disrupted, the evolution of financial products, it used to be a product. Banking used to be a verb. It's not anymore in my vocabulary. Banking today is a transactional aspect of allowing me to purchase or experience a service. And so, I look at Amazon. I think most of us during this whole COVID time, me in particular, 80% of what came into my household came in through Amazon. It was irrelevant to my banking relationship. I have an Amazon credit card, so my money is flowing through. I think where the banking industry needs to look and say, what is a banking experience today? It's not a set of going into a branch. It's not a set of products. It is an experience, and that experience in terms of facilitating the acquisition of the goods and services that I acquire. And I think if that is kept in mind, I think banking could absolutely evolve. I mean, I'd love to go to my bank site and have Amazon integrated into it and everything else, right? Like, they have the opportunity to be the overarching element, but they need to move fast on that. And that I don't necessarily see happening fast enough. So yes, I use Apple Pay. Yes, I use Amazon services. I do the things, and same thing from a commercial banking side, I think runs into the same set of challenges about what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. I think overall the banking element needs to rethink their product strategy in light of a new and evolving consumer today.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that banking is moving into a new paradigm, financial services in general, a new paradigm that is moving away from a product focus to a customer focus.
Frances, maybe just asking you a question on this, and sorry if it's a leading question, but if we do start to see, a lot of uptake of big tech financial services and potentially migration away from the banks, like do you think that our government will need to respond in that case, or at least what process do you think our government or lens will they look at that through?
Yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't be able to speculate on what may happen and what the government may want to do. I think there's a few things I would say. One is, our objective is to make sure that we can help companies scale right here in Canada with Canadian technology, with Canadian goods and services. We see, just to the client-centric aspect of this, I mean, we see companies need, they need money, they need financing, but they need a lot of other things in order to grow. They need access to skills, they need access to networks. So financing is a piece of what they need, but it's not all they need. And so what our objective is to kind of think about, back to the client-centric piece, what is it that we can do to support companies? If I look at some of our business accelerators and incubators, some of the really important ecosystem supports that they provide, yes, they can find paths to financing, but a big part of it is actually giving people other tools in the toolkit to be able to grow. So, I would always take a growth kind of a perspective on it. In terms of the other big players, I mean, we're pretty sensitive to the fact that, there's, I think we've seen that, the competition bureaus and always watching this around the big players, taking over. I think we all do want to, we certainly pay a lot of attention to it. Our ministers pay a lot of attention to it as well. I think, though, our objective is to make sure whatever happens, we've got IP, intellectual property, protected in Canada, that we are, helping companies grow with the right kinds of platforms, and protecting their IP. And clearly it's a competitive industry. But, would we rather, you'd rather have Canadian companies working on a Canadian platform? Yes. But at the same time, it's a balance, because you do want them to be able to sell internationally. So if we have platforms and opportunities to allow them to expand their market, then great. And that's really where we want to see the growth of the Canadian players.
Yeah, Cato, if I can just add a piece to this, is that our regulatory structure for our financial sector has not been updated. It used to be that we would have a 5-year review of the Bank Act, what was called the Bank Act. It was delayed, and in 2017, we started the review of the federal financial sector framework. It has not been completed, and at that time, they talked about open banking as being a part, and it was put in the budget. The enabling legislation was put in the budget. open banking means giving Canadians access to their own data and trying to create a secure way for them to do that, to share it with fintechs like yourself or others to get financial services that they need. And it is not moving forward. We recently heard that it's been shelved and delayed again. And we have to ask ourselves, with the rest of the world moving forward with open banking and ways to protect consumers and their data, Canada is at a major disadvantage if we don't push this forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. We are unfortunately almost at time, so maybe I'll just hand it over to everyone just to kind of conclude quickly here and share, what is the opportunity that you see in this sector that excites you the most, and you think that can push Canada forward on a global scale. So maybe Elisabeth, we'll start with you for just quick wrap up comment on the opportunity you see.
Well, I think the most important component is bringing investment into into our Canadian fintech market. And investment, investors are driven in terms of the results on two levels. So, the ability to scale in terms of customers, the ability to scale in terms of paying incoming revenue. I think we do a really good job on the early phases. I think we have real challenges as we get higher up. The acquisitions that start, the minute companies get within the $20 to $30 million range. I mean, I'm happily riding the Shopify story, and we need to create more entities such as Shopify, and I think certainly the challenges in our regulation prevent that. We have such a wonderfully stable financial structure to be working with in Canada, and we could be a model in terms of working with our incumbent financial institutions to offer truly innovative services that could be a model to the rest of the world. And we need to look at a way to overcome that. We have tremendous amount of investment available through the government programs, which really could create the base for highly competitive organizations. It just needs to I guess turn over in terms of that ability for adoption. And that should work closely in partnership. That I would love to see, contingent Canadian funding being dependent on having the end line customer in place in terms of partnership with our financial institutions.
Awesome. Frances?
Yeah, maybe I'll go back to a point I made earlier, Cato, which was around digital adoption. I mean, we've seen, in the COVID period like no other, the companies that are ready to be able to weather these kinds of issues are those that are moving on digital solutions, whether it's allowing their staff to work from home if they can, through technology and be able to serve clients, whether it's the physiotherapist who's able to, offer, Zoom calls to be able to serve clients. We all have many examples of it. And we also see actually, quite a lot of new companies cropping up in terms of new opportunities to serve and new products and services in the COVID context. I have Corporations Canada in my orbit, and their incorporations are way up. And a big part of that, as they've kind of surveyed people about why that is new opportunities related to COVID to be able to to serve a completely different need. And so I'm really optimistic about the innovation that's out there. I think that fintechs can play a really important role in those those burgeoning new companies that are comfortable with technology, that are born digital. And so you're not pushing them in a direction that they're not going into. So we think that that's pretty significant. I also think, just back to the consumer piece, more and more, and Elisabeth is mentioning Amazon, but I mean, look, people are so comfortable now just, using technology for so many things. And so that trust factor on the consumer end, I think, is going to be a continued opportunity that we'll see really will pay off.
Great, thanks. Michael?
I think Canada has an abundance of a very scarce resource that is going to be crucial to be successful, and that's human capital. I think we have an abundance of well-educated experts, both domestically as well as that we're attracting through immigration from abroad. These are the entrepreneurs like yourself, Cato, who are creating the companies, who have the innovative ideas. We have expertise in areas like artificial intelligence, like in payments, like in blockchain, like in credit risk modeling and lending. And these are the skills that you need to build fintechs as well as for your financial sector to thrive. I am very positive that we have those skills and that we're well positioned to develop them and attract more. And I just think that we need to find a way to really energize and enable them to be more successful.
Absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. I appreciate that closing statement, and we got to make sure that we keep that human capital here in Canada, right? Now that we've got it here, make sure it stays here. Yeah. Thank you, Elisabeth, Frances, and Michael, very much. It was a pleasure chatting with all of you, and thank you to the audience for listening. Hopefully, you found this useful and informative. Take care, everyone.